Welcome back to the Impact Driven Leader podcast. Your host, Tyler Dickerhoof. If you're watching on YouTube, what's up? How are you doing? If you're listening to wherever you listen to podcasts, man, I am glad you're listening in today. I'm so excited to share this second installment of my conversation with Rob Hoskins. Rob is the executive director of One Hope, an organization that helps transformation throughout the world, working with billions of kids. And he and I had an earlier podcast, maybe you listened to that, where we talked about the transformation process. Today, this segment, we're going to talk about his, kind of work into leadership styles. It's a book that he is currently writing as he shares. And we get into the three styles, the types of leaders: the inspirational leader, the activating leader, and the strategic leader. It's something I got tremendous value out of. And, as he described it, I could see the difference between them. And I actually saw where I fit. When we get into a discussion of some of the limitations of those types of leaders and how, fit into that and what we're good at, what we're not good at. So I hope you get tremendous value out of this segment today, talking about the different types of leaders, because this is what I know. The more that we know about our own style of leading, the better able we are to interact and engage with those around us and those that we lead. If this is the first time you've listened to the Impact Driven Leader podcast, I want to say thank you for being here. I'd love for you to rate, give me a review. Let me know what you think of this. Let me know what value you've gotten from these episodes, this episode. And if you'd be so gracious, I'd love it if you shared with somebody. If you got value out of today, if you got value out of this conversation I have with Rob, please share it. Do me a favor. I appreciate it. I'll see you at the end as we wrap up. Say, hey, Rob, good to see you. Thanks for joining me on the podcast. I know this is going to be a very fruitful conversation for me, hopefully the audience, and I intend and hope that it's fruitful for you as well. So again, thank you, man.
Well, Tyler, thank you. And I know it'll be fruitful because anytime I've spent with you, whether it's at a meal, on a golf course, or in a meeting, a strategic meeting, I'm always getting stuff from you. And that's the way great friendship is. And that's the way great leadership friendships are. I mean, it's iron sharpening iron. So happy to be with you today and excited about our call.
So we were, chatting a little bit here before the open. And one of the things that you shared with me, and this was on a trip almost a year ago, 11 months ago, we were in Guatemala together. We were riding a bus. We were going to one of our first day's events. And we got in this conversation about Peter Drucker. And at that point, I had just started reading through a book that was given to me, The Daily Drucker, and really digesting a lot of his stuff. It had been a book that had sat on my shelf for, at that point, 12 years. And I'd never grabbed it. But as I've learned, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. And I was ready. And I learned more in 2021 from Peter Drucker than I did probably any other source that I can pinpoint. And you shared how imperative Drucker has been in your leadership journey, your dad, your organization. So I'd like to kind of just kick off there and really for you to kind of encapsulate in a very small bit Peter Drucker and the leadership mentality that you've garnered and tried to lead with from his teachings.
Absolutely. I mean, we consider ourselves at One Hope, which is the organization I run. We consider ourselves a Drucker organization. So we've actually, and that started even before my dad founded One Hope. He was a disciple of Drucker. He would fly out quarterly and meet with him in Southern California, and Drucker mentored my dad. So it was very personal with us. But for the listeners that don't know, he is considered just about by everybody as the father of modern management, is kind of his title that he's been given. So he really didn't even consider himself a leadership guru. He considered himself a management guru. And I think that that's one thing we've been talking about, Tyler, is just the different types of leaders that have allowed us to sort of build on the foundations and how different some of those leaders are. So I actually think that Drucker is a very different type of leader than John Maxwell, who's a mentor to both of us. Very different from my dad's type of leadership. And so what I'm learning now at 50 years old plus, is, I'm still discovering who I am as a leader and what type of leader I am. And I just found more recently it's just really important for me to understand, I've been on a journey with John for quite a few years as a mentor, but the last 3 years we've actually begun to work together.
Hmm.
We wrote a book together, which was a hilarious and adventurous journey to write a book with John
I
Maxwell.
could only imagine.
Yeah.
Yes.
And more recently working with John and Mark Cole, who has taken over the Maxwell
Hmm.
Leadership Organization. And they had asked if I'd step in because our organization transitioned from my father to myself, and they really loved the way we went through that transition. So I've been working with them there. So deeply involved with John. And one of the things I've learned over these last 3 years working this intimately with John is how different we are as leaders, and that's kind of hard, you know.
Describe that a little bit.
Yeah, yeah,
I mean, and obviously, I know you very well intimately. I know John very intimately. So maybe those things will kind of resonate with me. But I'd love to be able to kind of just digest that a little bit with the audience, because I think that leads into the typology of leaders, and recognize two highly effective, empowering, compassionate leaders. But yet you recognize, hey, we're different.
yeah, yeah. And you know, I think that John is the quintessential um, inspirational leader. You know, I mean, and we all want to be that because John says, I mean, leadership is influence. In his definition of leadership, if you ask him what is leadership, leadership is influence.
Uh-huh.
And so we see him as this just archetype influential leader. And I think we all aspire to be that, right, at some level, because it's such a visible form of leadership. He comes into a room, he takes over the room. He gets on a stage and he mesmerizes everybody. Part of it is, I say, you know, it's just cheating because of your voice. I mean, just the depth of his voice. I mean, he could start saying ABC,
Yeah.
DEF, and you're like, oh, what's he going to say next? It's like,
What's the next?
well,
Yes.
of course you know what's next. G's coming next, but it doesn't matter. You want to hear it out of John's mouth. So, you know, he has that gift. And my dad was very much like that. He was a founder leader, and he was super inspirational. Still is at 85 years old. I mean, same sort of leadership as John. Walks in a room, even at 85 years old, starts speaking, and people just are rapt with attention.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think we look at leaders like that, and we just we want to be that. Who doesn't want to be that? You know, I mean, it's such an evidential
Yeah.
type of leadership. It's such an obvious
Yeah.
type of leadership.
Yeah.
And then I look at someone like a Peter Drucker, who was a very different type of leader than John, and I aspire to be like him. I mean, so when I look at typologies of leadership, I think what's important for all of us, Tyler, is to say, who are we? Who has
Yeah.
God made us to be, and what are our strengths, and what do we have that's unique and different than a leader like John or a leader like Peter Drucker, and really owning who we are. And I've really pressed into that over these particularly last 3 years, as I've been able to identify that not only will I never be John Maxwell, just because I don't have the same giftings as him. I really figured out for myself in my own psyche that I don't want to be John Maxwell. I mean, even if I had the gifts he had, getting close to him, what energizes him and what inspires him is very different than what energizes and inspires me at the end of the day. And so I've really gotten comfortable with saying, not only will I never be John Maxwell, I don't want to be John. I wouldn't be happy being John. Getting close to him and seeing the life he lives. I mean, that guy is just a people machine. I mean, he can be with people literally, like on our book tour, 19 hours a day, doing 3 cities a day. And the more people he's with, the more energized he gets. Now, I'm a people person, but I'm never going to be at that level, you know. And then he's happy just with, I influenced a ton of people today. That was the outcome, and I'm good to go now. I just know that what I deposited in them is going to have long-term impact on their life. And he doesn't need to take stock in really following them and asking, okay, what impact did I have on them? He's just got so much faith in what he's deposited in them that that's good enough for him. And I really realized for me, that's not good enough for me. And so I figured out that what really turns me on and what gets me up in the morning and what excites me about having significance in my life significance for me looks different than significance for John. And I think even, vicariously getting to know Peter Drucker through my dad and running a Drucker organization, I think if I was having a conversation if you and I were having a conversation with Peter Drucker on this call right now, and I was to ask him a question like, Peter, what gets you up in the morning? What's the driving force of your leadership? He would say something very different than John and say something very different than I would say. And so I think it's really important for all of us, Tyler, to really understand what type of leader am I, and what are the drivers, and where do I need to spend the highest and best use of my time? And it's going to be different. The highest and best use of my time is very different than the highest and best use of Drucker's time or John's time.
Mm-hmm. I think what's, as I try to digest all that, as the audience is digesting it too, I think it begs the maturity to say, hey, once you find out who you are, once you discovered kind of, those differences from other people, it's like, no, this is what energizes me. And I think there's such an importance as a leader to say, that's good enough.
Mm-hmm.
Let's just do more of that, as opposed to, well, it's not good enough. In order that I can lead like John and impact like John, I need to be more like John. So however I am, whatever energizes me, there's something wrong with that. I need to be more like someone else. I need to aspire to be more like my dad for you or whoever that may be. And it's like, no, once you understand, man, this is what sets me apart. I think once you can own that and be genuine and authentic to it and just raise your arm and say, hey, this is who I am. This is my belief, is that everyone around you says, whew, finally they figured it out. Now we're at ease. Now we can actually go somewhere.
Yeah, that's so good, Tyler. I think it is, for me, finding that sweet spot of leadership. Yeah. And it's not that I don't want to be like John. I mean, when it comes to influence and influencing people and inspiring people, I want to be as much like John as I can be. When it comes to being an activating leader and managing, I want to be as much like Peter Drucker as I can be. So what I figured out and what I'm writing on right now is 3 broad categories of a typology of leadership. And I'll give you these 3. This is the first time I've ever actually shared it in a public.
Man, this is breaking news right here. One, I didn't know that you were writing this book. I'm so excited about it. When's it going to come out? When are you thinking?
Well, I'm very early stages. I learned.
Okay. So you don't have that.
Not to throw a date out there that you miss, right?
Well, I'd like to help in your accountability factor here.
I actually have the first meeting with my publisher this afternoon. So
well, then you'll know more.
Yeah, hopefully.
Okay. All right.
So broadly speaking, when I look at John and I say, and he says leadership is influence. So I would classify him as an inspirational leader. John is an inspirational leader. Peter Drucker, his typology of leadership is what I'm calling an activating leader. So, and then I figured out for myself, I would classify myself as a strategic leader. And so whether you're an inspiring leader, a strategic leader, or an activating leader, I think at some level, you're not a leader if you don't have all 3 of those elements.
Sure.
It's not that you're just one of those things. I mean, John obviously is a strategic leader. John obviously is an activating leader. Look at all the businesses he's started, all the enterprises he's had. So I think great leaders have to have all 3 of those. But I think that sweet spot of leadership is found by saying, this is the core of who I am, and I need to spend the highest and best use of my time in that gift set. And there are different gift set that comes with each one of those typologies. So an inspirer has a different gift set than a strategic leader or an activating leader. And what drives them is going to be very, very different. So for John, as an inspiring leader, influence is his biggest driver. Yes. How many people can I influence? And that drives his calendar. That drives his writing. You've heard him how many times, Tyler, talk about the epiphany that came to him when his mentor told him, John, you've got to write books. Because if you don't write books, you're not going to influence the number of people in your lifetime that you could through what you're learning. So book writing became just the central part of his time. He does it every day. He's disciplined about it. because he knows if he doesn't write books, he's not going to influence people. That's the driving force for him. As a strategic leader, my main driver is outcomes. So I for me, it's not enough just to influence people. I want to know, if I influenced you, what was produced, and can I measure that? So even writing the book with John, people say, why did John Maxwell ask you to write a book with him? And I say, because he saw a gift set in me that I placed a higher priority on certain things than he did. And we were writing a book on transformation. And John was saying, I love the outcomes of Rob's life. I love the outcomes of the organization he built. We did a partnership before we did a book together, and we created a program together called Lead Today. And he was just fascinated by this process that I've developed in my leadership of how to measure outcomes, because you can't have transformation if you can't measure outcomes. I mean, everybody's talking about transformation. How do you do transformation? Well, you don't know whether transformation has happened unless you can measure that something has changed. So this is change science. It's the science of transformation. And you have to have a strategy in order to do that. You have to begin with the end in mind. And Tyler, at the end of the day, that's what inspires me. If we were talking to Peter Drucker and we would say, what drives him as an activating leader? He would say organization. Organization was Peter Drucker's drive. He created a science of management to bring order and organization around any situation, chaos. He's one of the great change managers of all time, because he's able to say, how do we see the changes that are happening and then bring organization and management to it in order to build something. So he was a builder. So what I see is, now any CEO has to have all three of these elements.
Yeah.
You got to be able to inspire people. You got to be able to build strategies, and you have to be able to build an organization to implement those strategies. And all three have to be happening simultaneously.
I think it's, you mentioned this earlier. There comes a place and time and a progress through your growth and leadership where you have to understand, hey, this is who I am. And again, I mentioned that earlier, is once you do, people around you are like, now we can actually move forward. Now we can actually go with this person. I think what's hard there, you had great models to help you discern, okay, that's not quite me. Well, I like that, but that's not quite me. And oh, maybe that's a better fit there. How would you suggest to someone who maybe doesn't have that quality of leader around them, modeling that for them, to figure out their own between this, the three, the inspirational, the activating, the strategic? How can they help to start to discern, all right, this is more of who I am? Because one that you did not mention that is a lot of leadership is the authoritarian. Because that's out there, right? And that's not inspirational. That's not activated. That's not strategic. I would say that's a fourth negative. You don't want to be that authoritarian. That was a Henry Ford, right? I am the leader. Everyone is my helper. That leader doesn't get very far. And if there's people that are listening that's the type of leader that they see, how can they position themselves to say, hey, there's a better way?
Yeah, I think there's all kinds of models of, even when John and I were writing the book, we were talking about what is a transformational leader. And what we discovered is, like, Hitler was transformational. Stalin was, Putin is transformational. Putin has transformed the nation of Russia. In some ways, he transformed it initially in a good way, because they were coming out of the chaos and people needed order. And his authoritarian leadership brought order. Well, now we're seeing the downside of the evil behind his motives, behind having an authoritative leadership behind him, and his agenda that existed there. So he's a transformational leader. But, John and I say in the book that in Change Your World, we talk about everything, in leadership rises and falls with influence. But all good transformational leadership rises and falls with your values. So for me, authoritarianism is driven out of poor values. authoritarian leadership is driven out of insecurity and it's driven out of pride. So I would say that Henry Ford was an
Yeah.
amazing strategic leader. He was a very strategic leader.
Yep.
Strategic leaders see early; they see before everybody else. That's what a good strategist does. He's always living in the future as a strategic leader, and he can see things other people don't see. But the problem with Henry Ford is that his authoritarian was his style of leadership. So I would consider authoritarianism more a style than a typology of leadership.
Okay.
I would say Ford was a strategic leader.
Yeah. Okay.
He was a very poor activating leader because he didn't empower people. So he was very top down authoritarian. So he could never have activators, managers that he would listen to.
Yeah.
And so this really created a very dysfunctional organization. And he wasn't a phenomenal communicator either. He wasn't a great inspirer.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not inspirational to say, I've got it all figured out and follow me. I mean, that's not influence. And so I would say that, yeah,
That's manipulation, but that's right. I mean, it's
yeah, that's coercion. I mean,
yeah.
no one wants to be coerced. It comes back to what you said. He had no empathy as a guiding value in his life. So a great inspirer that has influence, and at some level of leadership, all of us we have to be great inspirers. I mean, or else you have to have influence, or you're on a walk. You're not leading people.
Yeah.
So I think that that quality of empathy, John has a much higher level than I do. I mean, I'll just be honest, because I'm so focused on the outcome sometimes that I have a tendency to forget the people. And John never forgets the people. And this is one of the beautiful things I've learned about John. Like it's more important to him. If you're around him, you'll see this. Like the experiences along the way are more important to him than the destination. I have to be honest. The destination is more important to me because I'm all about the outcome. Like,
yeah,
I don't care if we all had a great time. Like, did we build something that has value and is it profitable? Is a much bigger driver for me. Now, John and I both have to, as leaders, say, well, it's not all about the experience on the way. We could have had a party and I influenced these people and they love me and they know I'm empathetic. But at the end of the day, we didn't build anything and it didn't add value to their life. And so, at that point, I'm not a good leader.
yeah.
And so I think that now my tendency as a strategic leader is to, I'm always living in the future. And so my team, you talked about when you're in your sweet spot, it's so much better for your team, right? Because that's where you kind of lose empathy for people because I'm always living in the future and I'm always about the outcome. So my team laughs because I'll come up with a new idea and I'll even build a strategy for that new idea. And then they say, here it comes. And I'll try not to say it. Then I'll always say, and it's easy. It's easy, and all my activating leaders are going, no, it's not easy. We have to totally revamp our organization to implement that strategy that you just developed, and that's where Druckers come along, the Druckerites in your life, the activators come along in your life and say, what type of systems and structure do we need to get to your strategy? And there is, Drucker would say, there is no leadership without management. That's it. He actually said leadership is management. So if John says, leadership is influence, Drucker says leadership is management. I say leadership is strategy. And we're all right to a degree, but as well-formed holistic leaders, you have to pull back. And back to your original question, you said, I've had good models around me. And I had. My dad is a quintessential John Maxwell type of person. And the beauty is that I had a dad and a father who understood and was self-aware. So this would be my answer to your question. Great leaders are self-aware of who they are. And they're so self-aware that they're willing to humble themselves. So if you're self-aware and not humble, So what? Not going to change anything.
You end up hiding it, right?
You're gonna hide it. You're gonna ignore it. You're gonna be so caught up in the moment that you're not contemplative about it. So I think that self-awareness with humility is the answer for me of really finding your sweet spot in leadership. So this is being well aware of what I'm good at and what I constantly need to be working on. So it's not that I don't need to be a better inspirer or influencer. No, I desire more of that in my life, even if that's not going to be my typology of leadership. So what I did very practically, being self-aware that John Maxwell is probably the greatest inspirational leader of our lifetime, I believe, as far as his ability to influence people. On the book tour, before we even started, I knew I was going to be with John for 9 straight days, that we were going to be in 2 to 3 cities a day, that half of our time was going to be in a private plane together with just 2 or 3 people. I said, John, I want you to critique me as deeply and as personally and as transparently as possible about my communication skills. And I'm a minister. I preached probably 100 times a year. It's not that I'm not on a platform a lot of my life, and I'm considered a good communicator. People book me years in advance. They pay me great money to come and speak. So it's not that I'm not a speaker and a communicator, but I'm now with someone who's a master. And I want to be as self-aware as possible. I could go, hey, Tyler, you know what? I'm good. People want me. Like, I get paid to do what I do as a speaker, as an influencer, as an inspirer. But I'm not John Maxwell. Mm-hmm. And you know what? I'll never be John, but I can be better than I am if I'm self-aware and I'm humble about it. And some people just aren't willing to go there. And I asked John to be brutal, and he was brutal. I mean, from the first time that I spoke, we got on the plane, and before I could even ask him and invite him in to critiquing me, he remembered what I said. And he started mentoring me. He started teaching me and telling me, hey, you've really got to slow down. You're way ahead of the audience. You're not taking time for the audience to catch up with you. Like, what you said was great, but how you sequenced it was way too fast, and I was losing you. And he says, I'm a pretty quick study. But he said, you lost the point. You lost the thread because you were, and so, I mean, that guy tore me apart for the first 20 minutes because I'd invited him to. Now, I got to be honest, part of me goes, oh, wow, here's a guy I love and respect that's now critiquing me. I mean, we're human, right, Tyler? And we don't want to hear, especially from people we love, and that we want them to esteem us greatly. Mm-hmm. Everybody wants that. That's a human driver in your life. You want people to love you. You want people to like you. And here you've got someone telling you how poorly you did, and it hurts. But if you can't get over that hurt really fast and say, look, this is what love looks like. This is what mentorship looks like. If he didn't care about me, he wouldn't be wasting his time on me. Mm-hmm. He wouldn't be spending his time.
Because there's a vulnerability of him sharing that with you.
Sure.
Too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've been in a similar situation where I've had people come to me and say, hey, Rob, mentor me in this area of my life. And the more I like them, even as a mentor, the more I want to protect them, and I don't want to do anything that could create more insecurity in their life because I'm sharing truth with them. So it's that sharing that truth and love that's a balance, and it's knowing when to mete out truth in a transparent way, and that's the empathy part of it. Like, I don't want to say things that are going to actually be destructive in this person's life. Maybe they're in an insecure place in their life right now. They can't take this truth right now. So you have to be able to measure that out. But at some level, you're not going to be a great leader if you're not willing to be humble enough and self-aware enough to have people around you that are honest with you. Yeah. And what I found, Tyler, finding that sweet spot as a leader for me has been all about saying, So I actually now I'm going through an exercise with these typologies of leadership, and I'm asking all my leaders underneath me and the people that they're mentoring to force rank themselves. So so I'm a strategy 1, inspire 2, activator 3. And if I was actually to put a percentage of sort of the quality of and the time I spend on each typology of leadership, I probably spend 60% of my time on strategy, 30% of my time on inspiration and catalyzing people, and about 10% of my time on actual management decisions. Now, I'm still the CEO of an organization. How can I do that? How can I only spend 10% of my time on managing the organization? Well, I've surrounded myself with activating leaders. My executive vice president is a guy named Marwan Rifka, former president of EDS. I mean, this guy was a Fortune 10 leader in the world, who came on when our organization began to grow, and I asked him to join us. And I instantly structured the organization in such a way where Marwan oversees all finance, he oversees all administration and management. So on a daily basis, I only have one direct report right now, my chief of staff, because now all of our leaders, all of our cabinet, all of our vice presidents report to me on strategy and vision. So they have dual accountabilities.
Mm-hmm.
They report to Marwan on those things that are very activating, and they report to me on those things that are very strategic. So I think having that self-awareness of who you are creates what Drucker calls a flat leadership structure.
Yeah.
It's an empowering management structure.
There's a topic that Rob and I dug into for a moment, and it was that idea of being self-aware. Man, as I've continued on this path, and since I had this conversation with Rob now a few weeks ago, and as this is preparing to release, I think about how important it is for the leader to be self-aware. I've talked about it, other podcast guests, maybe you've ever heard some of those recent episodes. Self-awareness is a tool that really you can't have too much of. If you're willing to be aware. Now, it's not deprecating. It's not being, this idea of I'm going to think less of myself. I'm going to be aware of all my faults. It's like, no, be aware of them so you know how to work around them. Be aware of your strengths. If you think about this, if you're aware of your strengths and those, the limitations you have, if your idea is how can I do more, dig into what you're great at. If you're a strategic leader, don't think, oh, I wish I was more inspirational or activating. Dive into being more strategic. Put people around you to activate and inspire. Just because you're not an inspirational leader doesn't mean you're not inspirational. Just because you're not strategic doesn't mean you're not a great leader. To me, it's really finding what you're great at and doing more of it. Because a leader's job is to influence. A leader's job is, in my opinion, to help others accomplish more than they thought they could. If you can do that as a leader, that's it. You're a leader. And you're creating change. You're impacting lives. You're an impact-driven leader. Thanks for listening in today. I hope you got value out of this. If you aren't a subscriber, please subscribe. You can also go to my website, tylerdickerhoff.com. You can subscribe to my weekly email. Check out my blogs. I release 2 blogs a week, Monday and Wednesday. My weekly email gets sent on Friday. I'd love for you to receive that content, and I hope it adds value to you. Thanks for listening in. Thanks for watching. Until next time, have a good one.